Our next speaker is André Arko. He's the lead of the Bundor team and the co-author of the Ruby Way book. He founded Ruby Together a year ago, and he's here to tell us how it's been. So welcome on stage, André.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I guess let me introduce myself a little bit. As you were all just informed, my name's André Arko. On the internet, I'm pretty much always indirect. That is my internet web page picture. You might recognize me from an internet web page. I work at Cloud City as a Ruby and Rails consultant, doing architectural consulting and senior dev pairing and other stuff like that. If your engineering team could use architectural consulting or senior dev pairing, maybe talk to me later. I co-authored a book that came out this year. It's cool, The Ruby Way. The first edition of The Ruby Way actually is the book that I first learned Ruby from way back in the early 2000s. And so I'm super happy to have updated it for Ruby 2.2 and 2.3. And now I have my own thing with my own name on it that I can use to prop up my monitor when it needs to be taller, which is pretty great. I lead the team that works on Bundler, and I guess that's an entire different talk, I guess. It's turned out to be a lot of hard work, but a really great way to learn about Ruby and a really great way to interact with kind of the whole community. We've recently put a lot of work into trying to make it clear how to contribute to Bundler and how to get started contributing to open source. So if that's something that you're interested in doing but kind of feel like the way to do it isn't really clear, I encourage you to talk to me later, either online or here in person, and I would love to try and help you out with that. The other project that I work on is the one that I'm actually here to talk about today, which is Ruby Together. Ruby Together is pretty new. It's actually been around for like just about 18 months now. Maybe you've heard of it. If so, that's really cool. If not, well, I'm going to tell you a bunch more about it right now. So, what even is a Ruby Together? Very, very briefly, Ruby Together is a nonprofit that pays developers to work on Ruby infrastructure like Ruby Gems and Bundler and the servers that run rubygems.org. It gets that money from nonprofit members. Members can be any person or any company that uses Ruby. And the work that we pay for is free for anyone who uses Ruby to then in turn use. So what exactly are the details behind that? Well, that's basically what the rest of this talk is about, so keep listening. The reason that this happened is ultimately Ruby has kind of grown up. The Ruby community is a lot bigger than it used to be, and that means that the Ruby community has kind of outgrown its roots as a volunteer run set of infrastructure, right? As you've probably noticed, Bundler makes it a lot easier to use gems than it used to be before Bundler existed. Bundler also makes it easier to create gems than it was before Bundler existed. And so over the 6 years that I've spent working on Bundler, the number of gems has multiplied, and there are now there are now more than 100,000 named gems. There are now more than 1 million versions of those 100,000 named gems. And the number of gem downloads has gone up exponentially. How exponentially, you ask? Well, in the first decade of Ruby Gems existence, from 2004-ish to 2014, approximately 2 billion gem downloads happened, which is super cool. 2 billion, that's like a pretty big number, right? And then 2015 happened, and from the beginning to the end of 2015, we served 4 billion gem downloads. So that's like 1 decade, and then twice as much as that decade in 1 year. As you may have noticed, that is a very large increase. I am very sad to say we did not see the same increase in the number of people volunteering to work on Bundler and Ruby Gems. Most people don't even realize this, but the team that works on rubygems.org is incredibly small. It's never had more than 4 people on it at a time, and most often it only has 2 people on it. And the Bundler team is even smaller. Bundler has never had more than 2 people consistently working on it at any given time, and honestly, most of the time has only had 1 person consistently working on it most of the time. And all of those team members, when I say up to 4 people, what I actually mean is up to 4 people who have full-time paying jobs that are not working on that thing, and who sometimes spend nights and weekends. And a few volunteers giving up their nights and weekends to the community was enough during that decade that we served 2 billion gems, but it's not enough during the year that we served 4 billion gems. So let me give a single example from, it's a few years back now, but this example kind of encompasses all of the points that I'm trying to make in one thing, so it's really a good illustration. So about 3 years ago, rubygems.org went down completely, and it was down for like an entire week. And it turned out that the underlying reason that that happened was that there was a security issue. Depending on how long you've been doing Ruby stuff, you may remember there was a thing where if you were really clever with your YAML, you could make a Rails app execute any code you wanted. And so the rubygems.org team at the time was on top of things enough to bump the Rails version, so we weren't obviously vulnerable anymore. But hey, it turns out, if you decompress a .gem, it's really just a tarball. There's a .yaml inside that tells you all about the gem. And somebody realized, oh, hey, I could put that clever YAML that makes Ruby execute any code I want inside the YAML, inside the tarball that rubygems.org will read when I push a gem. And they pushed a really cleverly constructed gem, and they took over the entire rubygems.org server. Hooray! So we had to take down the server completely. Like, they had access to run literally any code that they wanted on the server. We had to make completely new servers from scratch, and this is really the thing that took forever. We had to download every single .gem in existence and run a checksum against it, and compare that checksum to checksums from other .gems that we'd gotten from mirrors and from people who happened to have collected most of the gems that had ever existed before the server was hacked. The problem was we knew that the hacker had had enough access to have potentially replaced any .gem file with anything that they wanted to replace it with. And so we knew that if we just brought the server back up, it was entirely possible that Rails was now a Trojan horse, and the next person to run gem install Rails would get owned. And so since we had no guarantees about any gem file that existed, we spent, I want to say it was about 4 days just downloading gems and checksumming them and comparing them to other gems that we'd gotten from mirrors. And in the end, it turned out that the hacker had been relatively benevolent and hadn't actually replaced any gems with Trojan horses. But that didn't mean that we didn't need to check every single gem before we could let anyone install them again. And so the part of this story that really illustrates the ongoing problem that Ruby Together exists to try and help is that while rubygems.org was down, literally hundreds of developers showed up online and said, oh, my boss said that I can help. Like, please, how can I help? I just want to get rubygems.org back up faster. And I don't know how many of you have read the Mythical Man Month, but 100 developers working on a week-long problem does not mean that the problem is solved in 15 minutes. Not a single one of those volunteers could do anything useful. None of them had any idea how our existing servers worked. None of them had any idea how to set up a working set of new servers. None of them were familiar with any of the things that needed to be familiar with to like actually do helpful work. And then, of course, after that, rubygems.org came back up. And at that point, we went around and followed up with all of those people who had offered to volunteer. And we said, hey, we actually have some time to work with you now to familiarize you with the system so that you could help us in the future. And we got exactly 0 people who were willing to help now that it was back up. And I guess the lesson that I learned from that is that when there's not an emergency, no one's really interested in contributing back to make sure that our community resources continue to work and continue to be resources for the community. So this is the point at which almost everyone says to me, but what about those companies that pay people to work on open source full time? And I guess businesses are ultimately answerable to shareholders, and shareholders ultimately say, give us profits. And most businesses seem to have kind of the mindset that says, hey, we can get all the benefits of the community by doing nothing, so let's do that. And while there are some exceptions, and over the years, I guess this list is maybe, I don't know, there's a few. Engine Yard, Sun, AT&T, EuRuKo, Red Hat, Shopify, GitHub, other companies. But, and this is really an illustration of how it's not a solution, at one point in time, Engine Yard by itself employed the entire Rubinius team, the entire JRuby team, everyone getting paid to work on Rails, and everyone getting paid to work on Bundler. One company. And then, not too long after that, they changed their mind. And when they decided to stop, the JRuby team had found another company to fund their work, but Rubinius no longer had a full-time team, and Rails no longer had any full-time developers, and Bundler no longer had any developers of any kind getting paid to work on it. Today, for example, if a single Salesforce executive changes their mind, Ruby core is going to have a really bad time. And so one of our goals, and one of like the driving forces behind making Ruby Together this kind of nonprofit, is to deliberately spread the cost across many companies and across many people, because I totally understand that individual people will have financial ups and downs, and I totally understand that individual companies will have financial ups and downs. But these resources are for the entire community, and the only way that we can sort of make the entire community able to use them is by making the entire community where we get the resources from. And so, because of the way that Ruby Together works, a single company changing their mind or needing to cut costs no longer means that our entire plan is now gone. So, the way that I wound up starting Ruby Together is, after working on Bundler and working a little bit on Ruby Gems over the last 6 years, this set of problems that I just told you about was really clear to me, but it wasn't really clear to other people, right? Like, if you're not having a problem, it's hard to understand that there's like a problem coming that you haven't hit yet. And Bundler and Ruby Gems have, to be perfectly clear, in the past always managed to get along with volunteers doing the work. Companies have built huge, wildly successful businesses on top of Ruby open source, and that makes everything seem pretty okay, right? And so, kind of seeing this coming, where we weren't going to be able to scale to continue to support the community, I actually spent years like trying different experimental things, like, can we do support contracts? Can we do feature bounties? Can we do enterprise-only features? Can we, I tried everything I could think of. I tried everything anyone I talked to could think of. And ultimately, on the one hand, none of them were like a big enough improvement for a company to really be super interested in paying for them. But while they still weren't convincing for companies to pay for, they took a ton of time away from being able to actually just work on the open source projects. And so that really none of those options worked out. In the end, the thing that actually made all of this happen was that there was one company that just said, hey, would it be easier to work on Bundler if we just gave you money? And once I'd recovered from that question, because it was shocking, I said yes. And Stripe actually just said, okay, here's some money. And that was amazing. And so because of that money from Stripe, I was able to research different kinds of nonprofits. I was able to hire a lawyer. I was able to found Ruby Together as an actual US nonprofit. And we're a specific kind of nonprofit, what the US government calls a trade association, So other trade associations that you may have heard of include the Linux Foundation, the jQuery Foundation, the SQLite Foundation, and the American Dairy Farmers Association. I guess the underlying idea there is that many people and companies from that trade or kind of profession all pitch in money together, and by spreading that cost out across the community, you're able to do things that no one individual company or person could have done by themselves. And the Got Milk ad campaigns are actually a really good example of that, where the American Dairy Farmers Association is able to buy really expensive nationwide ad campaigns and television commercials and billboards and magazine ads. And it's because all of the dairy farmers are working together to get these ads that help all of them by advertising milk. So each trade association uses dues from members to benefit everyone in that trade, even the people who aren't dues-paying members. If you're a dairy farmer and you don't pay the American Dairy Farmers Association, Got Milk still helps you out. And if you use Ruby, what Ruby Together does still helps you out, even if you're not giving money to Ruby Together. So, speaking of benefiting everyone, let me give you a brief rundown of what we've gotten done over the last year and a half. So the big underlying thing that Ruby Together has done in the last 18 months is that we paid for 1,100 hours of developer time. And that sounds like a really big number. I guess it is a really big number. It's much bigger than I thought would be possible initially. And we've gotten a lot of stuff done with that time. So let me briefly give you a rundown of what we've gotten done and some of the work that goes into keeping all this infrastructure actually working. So we've released 5 significant versions of Bundler in the last 18 months. In Bundler 1.9, we started using a new dependency resolver called Molineo, which was funded by a grant from Stripe and is actually now shared between Bundler and RubyGems and CocoaPods. And that means that anyone who finds a bug in any of those things and gets it fixed means that those bug fixes are now shared across multiple things that resolve dependencies, and that's pretty cool. In Bundler 1.10, we added a lock command, we added optional groups, we added conditional groups, and this is my favorite, we added the ability to mute post-install messages 1 gem at a time. So now you can never be told to HTTP party hard again. In Bundler 1.11, we dramatically improved error messages across the board, and we dramatically improved the errors that you see when gems have conflicting requirements and the resolver is unable to successfully complete. In Bundler 1.12, we shipped the results of a 3-year-long project to replace the metadata information about gems. I guess this is maybe not common knowledge, but in every version of Bundler between 1.1 and 1.11, every time you run bundle install, it has to re-ask the server for all the information about every single gem that it might need to install. This takes a while. And it's why when it says fetching gem metadata, there are a bunch of dots. Every dot represents another round trip to the server because it just found out about some more gems that it needs more metadata about. And so the new index format completely does away with that system, and you're able to keep information about gems that you've downloaded in the past and not have to download it again. It's a huge improvement. In Bundler 1.13, thanks to that new index format, we were finally able to support required Ruby version on gems. And so now it is theoretically possible, I hope we worked out all the bugs, to put a Ruby version in your gem file and then stop trying to install gems that don't work in that Ruby version. Hooray, it's amazing, rocket science. We also added a doctor command to fix broken compiled gems. And we added the ability to add and remove platforms. So if you want Bundler to resolve on Java and on non-Java Ruby, you can now explicitly opt into that or opt out of it. We also ran multiple Summer of Code projects. As part of Ruby Together, we managed 2 Google Summers of Code and 2 Rails Girls Summer of Code teams for a total of I think about 11 students across those 2 summers. In the last 6 months, or more than 6 months now, in the last 9 months since the beginning of the year, we've actually taken over maintenance of Ruby gems. Bundler depends on it, and in another example of why open source jobs are not a solution, 2 years ago, AT&T Interactive wound down their Ruby open source department, leaving Aaron Patterson and Eric Hodel out of a job. Eric Hodel had been working on Ruby Gems as part of his job at AT&T Interactive, and in the 2 years since that was no longer his job, Ruby Gems hasn't had a maintainer. I'm going to get this number wrong. I think there was just one security release that was basically an emergency, and there were bugs that were 2 years old with no fix. So since the start of this year, we've released 1 minor version and 8 bug fix versions of Ruby Gems, which is pretty exciting. And in those versions, we fixed bugs ranging from 1 week old to 2 years old. I am very happy to say that the 2-year-old bug is now squashed. Windows users are able to install compiled gems again on Ruby versions older than 2.2. Yeah. On the server, oh, thank you. It's very exciting. I'm very excited. On the server side, we have also done a lot of work, both on the rubygems.org Rails app and servers, and on the Bundler Dependency API Sinatra app and servers. It's a long story. I've actually given an entire talk about why they are 2 separate applications. What is that called? Ruby Gems Extreme Makeover, something. You can find it online. Anyway, so for long legacy reasons, they're 2 completely separate applications. As a result, we actually have to do operations work on 2 completely separate systems hosted on completely separate platforms. 1 system for gem metadata and 1 system for the actual gem files. In the last year and a half, we've applied more security patches than I could count in a timely manner. Yes. We've deployed the server-side part of the new compact index format that Bundler 1.12 uses, and we even actually managed to port the Bundler API into the main rubygems.org app, which means very, very soon we will only have 1 platform to do ops on instead of 2, and I'm very excited about that as well. We also switched, or I guess I should say, we've started using Fastly as our CDN, and we've also done a ton of work to migrate rubygems.org to be CDN agnostic. In the past, we'd used CloudFront because it was easy to integrate with, but that meant that we wound up with a ton of hard-coded Nginx configuration and Rails app configuration that only worked with CloudFront. And when we had problems with CloudFront, which, as the person who looks at the tickets, every few weeks someone would say, hey, this gem doesn't exist. And it would turn out that that gem only didn't exist in Canada, or only didn't exist in South America, or only didn't exist. And so CloudFront was very frustrating to troubleshoot because all you had to do was wait 1 to 3 days and it would suddenly be fine. But like, what do you tell the guy in Canada for that 1 to 3 days? So we migrated rubygems.org to be CDN agnostic so that we can actually use any CDN, and we've actually gotten a new CDN with more data centers and more visibility and control for us to troubleshoot. And so nowadays you can actually get gems from a nearby data center instead of from US West, which is where every request had to go, even if it was eventually going to go to a CDN in the past. On top of proactive maintenance, we've also handled a bunch of incidents. Paying developers means that you can afford to be on call, which is really cool. It also means that you can afford to prioritize fixing failures because you're still getting paid. You're not having to stop getting paid in order to fix incidents, which is also very cool. So the Ruby Together team has handled multiple incidents involving Ruby Gems and the Bundler API over the last year. And we've been able to restore everything to full operation with very minimal downtime. Like, obviously I can't prove this, but believe me when I say rubygems.org would have been down more and for longer if we hadn't been paying people to make sure that it stayed up. One more thing that we did, we built a completely new tool to help people manage gems. As we talked to people who were joining Ruby Together, a thing that we kept hearing over and over is, we really need a way to have our own internal gems, and we really need a way to keep copies of the gems that we need from rubygems.org somewhere locally that we can get to quickly. And Gemstats actually does both of those things. It's pretty sweet. You can run it on your laptop to avoid downloading gems from rubygems.org twice. You can run it in your office to keep a local copy so that you can install every developer machine really quickly. And you can run it in your data center so that when you deploy, your gems are coming from, like the next rack over rather than coming from multiple data centers away. On top of that, it acts as a server of private gems. You can put all your company's internal gems on your gem stash that you keep in your data center. Hopefully, everything will be happy. I would love for more people to use Gemstash. This is a direct result of us having time to be able to pay people to work on stuff that the entire community can use. Starting to wrap up, later this fall, we're going to release Bundler 1.14 and then Bundler 2.0 after that. So when we were designing Bundler 1.0, we made a bunch of trade-offs that were based on a world where 30% of Rubyists still use Ruby 1.8. And they were based on a world where 50% of Rubyists weren't even sure that a dependency manager was a good idea. And those old trade-offs, some of them still make sense, but some of them are actually pretty problematic nowadays. It would, surprisingly to me, people realize that a dependency manager is actually a good thing that you would want basically all the time. And we don't actually use Ruby 1.8 that much anymore. So it would be cool to be able to stop supporting Ruby 1.8. So the raw functionality isn't going to change, but the interface will change a little bit, and the way things work in the background will change a little bit, and really it'll just mean that things are better and easier to use and work a little bit better and a little bit faster because we no longer have to keep things working in the old way that they always used to. Everyone will be able, don't freak out, everyone will be able to keep using Bundler 1 and Bundler 2 at the same time. You can have some projects on one and some projects on the other. That's really the other big breakthrough that we made this summer. So I'm really excited about the improvements that this will make possible, and I'm really excited about sharing all of that with you, like maybe later this fall or maybe early next year. Looking a little bit farther forward into the future, the last thing that I am super excited about, I've spent 6 years basically sad that RubyGems and Bundler are two separate things because they do 50% overlapping stuff, and they have 40% overlapping code that tries to do the same stuff and almost does the same stuff, but it doesn't quite. And it's super frustrating to try and keep those two things in sync when it's really two completely separate code bases. And so we actually have a plan to get those code bases into one place and stop re-implementing everything across projects, and that's going to be super awesome. So after Bundler 2 comes out, the main focus of the combined Bundler and RubyGems teams is going to be getting the two code bases together into one thing, and then we will release Bundler and RubyGems 3.0 from a single code base, and it's going to be awesome. So somehow, this is working. The last year and a half has been honestly more successful than I expected it to be. Ruby Together is paying developers for work every single week. We fixed more bugs and we've made more progress on Bundler and on RubyGems in the last year than we managed in the 3 years before that. We started out super strong and we saw new companies and developers signing up every single month for an entire year. And for the last 6 months, even as we've set new hours for paid records, for new records for paid hours, even as we've managed the Google Summer of Code project for all of Ruby, even as we've made these really exciting plans that I am just ecstatic about to bring RubyGems and Bundler together, membership has been totally flat. We've seen a few new members, we've seen a few members leave. Overall, we're in the same place after 18 months as we were after 12 months. So we can consistently pay for several people for a few hours a week, but we can't even afford yet to pay 2 developers half-time. Some companies, like Stripe, as I mentioned before, and CodeMiner42 and Basecamp and Travis, New Relic, Airbnb, a few others, have stepped up to support us with actual money. But honestly, most companies tell us, this is a great initiative, we're so glad this exists, keep it up. We haven't seen any companies, significant companies join in the last 6 months, and if that keeps up, we can't keep doing this. We're eventually going to recreate the old world of unsustainable volunteers burning themselves out as we slowly lose the ability to pay them. So in the end, what Ruby Together offers for individual Ruby developers is pretty straightforward. It's free tools and it's free hosting, and you're able to share Ruby code with anyone and use anyone else's Ruby code. And what we offer for companies is a little bit more complicated, but still pretty cool. And it's a cost so low that it would only pay for 10 or maybe 15 hours a week per month. And instead, you get the benefits of 1 or 2 full-time developers working on Ruby infrastructure directly benefiting your company. We're working on that, and so for now, we're asking, help us be able to work on Bundler and RubyGems and rubygems.org and all of those things. Go to rubytogether.org, sign up, take rubytogether.org to your managers, get them to sign up, and everything that we build with the money from the community will be freely shared back with the community, and that's what Ruby Together is really about.
Thank you, Andre. The work that you do for the community is just amazing. You know, I guess, you know, we just take all these tools and this hosting for granted. It's actually so many people working behind that, and it's so hard. So thank you very much. Okay.
This mic, oh, hello. Can you put my computer back up real fast? Also, I brought swag. Everybody can get stickers. I have so many stickers. You should come get stickers. I have Ruby Gem stickers and Gemstash stickers and Bundler stickers and Ruby Together stickers, and this is a world premiere, I have fancy Ruby Together pins. If you are a Ruby Together member, if you're not a member, go to rubytogether.org right now. And if you are a member, or as soon as you are a member, come to me and I will give you a cool pin. All right.